Soren stared at the marriage certificate in his hands, quietly realizing he was really married now. He traced the words for the 10th time since leaving the courthouse, struggling to believe it given who he married, but finally accepting it. Folding the paper, he put it in his pocket and locked the house in front of him. A 2-story building with white walls and blue roof tiles. He turned to his wife, Ethia, who sat silently in her wheelchair, staring straight ahead. Her pale skin, sharp features, and long black hair looked too perfect to be real, like a doll owned by the wealthy. Beautiful but lifeless. She hadn't spoken since they left the Civil Affairs Bureau. Taking a deep breath, Soren forced cheer into his voice and announced their new home. Ethia stayed silent. Shaking his head inside, he grabbed her wheelchair handles and pushed her toward the door, then gave her a tour inside. He showed her the living room, calling it small but nice, then the kitchen, asking if she wanted anything to eat or drink, but she remained quiet. He kept going despite the silence, showing her the small backyard, storage room, and other spots. By the time they reached the top of the stairs, his throat was dry and his hope fading. They arrived at the bedroom, where he opened the door to reveal a double bed, wardrobe, and nightstand. He asked if she was tired, noting it had been a long day. Ethia stared at the bed without replying. After 15 seconds, Soren chuckled and took her silence as a yes. He moved the wheelchair close to the bed, positioned himself carefully, and leaned down, sliding one arm under her knees and the other behind her back. The moment his hands touched her, a bone-deep cold hit him, spreading fast and numbing his arms. Ethia recoiled, her body stiffening and pulling away with raw rejection. Her breathing became shallow and sharp, and for the first time since they met, her eyes showed real emotion, disgust. Soren froze mid-move, bent over her with arms committed to the lift. The cold in his limbs was nothing compared to how she flinched from his touch as if he were poison. The thought that she couldn't stand being touched by him hit harder than the cold. Still, he forced himself to continue, adjusting his grip carefully to avoid making it worse. He ignored the cold and her discomfort, laying her on the bed as gently and quickly as he could. He muttered that he was done and wiped sweat from his forehead with numb fingers. Noticing her gaze, he looked at her lying still and wondered if she was always that physically cold. He thought about how miserable and painful it must be to live in such a body, likely making her unwilling to talk to anyone. Softening his voice, he asked if she was okay or needed anything, water or an extra blanket. Ethia's eyelashes flickered, and her lips finally moved, muttering in a chilling, low tone that she needed sleep. Soren blinked in surprise but nodded, telling her to rest and wishing her good night. He stood, stretched, and moved to the other side of the bed, about to lie down when she spoke again, asking to be alone. He froze with one knee on the mattress and asked what she meant. Her ice-blue eyes stayed fixed on him. Soren guessed she didn't want him to sleep with her, and she confirmed it. He blinked, then faced her fully, asking why since they were now husband and wife. He reminded her she signed the papers herself and asked if she'd been honest. Ethia looked away, and silence grew awkward. Soren opened his mouth but closed it, swallowing the words that he wasn't fit to be the Ice Empress's husband. There was no point in reopening old wounds. She had once been the revered Ice Empress of the Morvain family, a woman whose beauty and grace silenced rooms of CEOs and drew the elite's attention. Now, she was a crippled girl in a wheelchair, married off to a nobody like him and discarded by the family that once showcased her. He thought that if their roles were reversed, he probably wouldn't want to talk to anyone either. Finally, he agreed to sleep on the floor. She glanced at him, about to speak, but he cut her off, explaining he'd stay nearby in case she needed help at night since she couldn't get up alone. She stayed silent, which he took as agreement. Soren grabbed a spare futon and cushion from the closet, spread them on the floor beside the bed, and lay down with his arms behind his head, staring at the ceiling. An hour or two passed with his eyes open. He should have been sleepless from happiness, married to the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, but instead, He was sleepless because he'd uncovered the truth. Since the ceremony ended, since both families looked relieved to sign the papers and handed over the house deed like trash, the Morvain family had freed themselves from their broken jewel, a burden no longer theirs to bear. His own family had finally rid themselves of embarrassment, the son who never fit in or measured up. They'd married them off to each other and forgotten they existed. Soren recalled his father's last words at the courthouse. "You're free now, Soren. Live your own life. We won't interfere." Freedom was a joke. They'd been abandoned, both of them, cast out and given this empty house in a quiet neighborhood where no one would see or remember them. Soren stared at the dark ceiling, knowing he'd been abandoned long ago, always ignored and pushed aside in family photos, a fact he'd made peace with years ago. But Althea, Soren turned his head slightly, looking up at the bed where she lay. He wondered if she'd realized what had happened to them, if that's why she'd acted differently. Not because of him, but because she'd finally understood their fall from grace. Just months ago, she'd been the revered Ice Empress, adored and celebrated by all. People lined up to meet her. Powerful guilds offered fortunes to recruit her. Princes and young masters sent marriage proposals. Her family paraded her around like a trophy. Now, those same people dumped her in this house with a stranger and told her to disappear. Soren couldn't imagine what such a fall felt like. He'd never lived that life. He'd always been at the bottom. He knew it was unwise to judge others without empathy. What happened was done, and dwelling on it served no purpose. At least they had a roof over their heads, and their families hadn't thrown them out on the streets. Though the house was empty and cold, it was still a shelter. He glanced at Althea again and quietly vowed that since he married her, he would support and protect her for life. This wasn't a romantic vow but a personal choice, an ordinary man's promise to do his duty as a husband. She was his wife now, for better or worse, and he had signed the paper and made that promise. Unlike their families, he didn't make promises he didn't mean to keep. Whatever happened, he would see it through. The thought gave him a strange relief, as if he'd finally found solid ground after drifting in uncertainty. He closed his eyes again, his breathing slowed, and the tension in his shoulders eased. Sleep pulled at him gently now, no longer held back by racing thoughts. Eventually, darkness claimed him. Deep in his mind, something stirred. A pulse that bypassed his senses and resonated in his core. His unconscious mind caught it faintly, like a dreamer hearing distant thunder. The pulse came again, stronger and clearer. Then, cutting through the void of sleep like a voice speaking to his soul, came words that weren't words, thoughts not his own. Conditions met. Awakening initiated. A heartbeat of silence. Then everything ignited. Pain exploded through Soren's body as something deep inside was torn apart and rebuilt at once. His back arched, hands clenched. A strangled gasp died in his throat as his lungs seized. Heat flooded his veins, then cold. The two sensations battled inside him, burning equally. His thoughts scattered, reformed, then scattered again as something grew inside, expanding. A core of energy blazing to life in the center of his chest where nothing had been moments before. The pain peaked, then stopped as suddenly as it began. Soren lay gasping on the futon, drenched in cold sweat, heart pounding, vision swimming with afterimages of light. Slowly, his breathing steadied. In the silence that followed, a final message echoed in his mind. Awakening complete. You have awakened. Investment authority. The messages faded. Soren lay there, chest heaving, staring at the ceiling, mind racing to process what had happened. Awakening? Investment authority? None of it made sense. He'd been tested at 15 like everyone else, undergone the awakening ceremony many times, and the results were clear. No core, no talent, no ability, no potential. He was unawakened, a dud. 7 years had passed. People didn't spontaneously awaken in their 20s. Yet, snap, his eyes shot open wide. His head whipped toward the bed on pure instinct, pupils pinpricks. A masked black figure hovered over Althea's sleeping form, a blade in one gloved hand catching faint moonlight, descending toward her throat. Soren's body exploded off the futon. He crossed the distance to the bed in a single heartbeat, moving with a speed he'd never had and shouldn't have been possible. His shoulder slammed into the figure's torso before the blade could fall another inch. Both crashed hard against the wall. Pained groans echoed in the dark as Soren's vision blurred from the impact, but he held on. His arms locked around the intruder, pinning them to the broken wall. His mind raced. Who was this? An assassin? The intruder recovered quickly, driving a knee into Soren's stomach. Air exploded from his lungs, and his grip loosened just enough for the figure to twist free and stumble toward the window. Soren gasped and lunged again, but his foot caught the futon's edge. Half a second cost him everything. By the time he balanced, the window was open, and the figure was gone, swallowed by the night. Soren stood, chest heaving, staring at the empty frame as cold night air brushed his sweat-soaked skin. Slowly, he turned to find Ithea awake, her ice-blue eyes wide and fixed on him with complex emotions. Shock above all. She looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. He opened his mouth to speak when pain hit him. Every muscle screamed. He staggered, caught himself on the bed frame, and groaned. His body felt like it had been through a meat grinder. The burst of speed was gone, leaving only agony. He forced himself upright and met her gaze. Worried, he asked if she was okay. Ithea's eyes stayed wide, fixed on him with that strange look, shock and something he couldn't name. Then her gaze dropped, lips parted, and she pointed at his arm. Soren looked down, confused, and saw blood soaking his sleeve, dripping onto the floor. He pressed his other hand to the wound, warm blood seeping between his fingers. He said it was just a scratch. Ithea stared at him, at the blood, at how it kept dripping despite his pressure, but said nothing. Silence stretched. Soren turned back to the window, leaning out carefully to scan the darkness below. No movement or sound, just shadows and distant rustling. Whoever the intruder was, they were likely gone. He pulled the window shut and locked it, leaving the broken glass for morning. "I'll be back," he said, quickly leaving the room. The bathroom was small and cold. Soren flipped on the light, squinting at the sudden brightness, and opened the cabinet. In the cold, cramped bathroom, Soren searched for the first aid kit and found it on the bottom shelf. He set it on the counter and inspected the wound under bright light. It was deeper and worse than he thought, possibly poisoned. He grabbed disinfectant and poured it directly onto the injury. The burning made him clench his teeth, but he kept going until the bottle was half empty. He exhaled shakily and reached for gauze. Wrapping the bandage with one hand was hard. It slipped and soaked with blood several times. After 3 tries, before losing consciousness, Soren secured it tightly. The bleeding slowed and stopped. Leaning on the counter, he breathed hard. Suddenly, a familiar ding echoed in his mind, and glowing, translucent words appeared. Investment detected. Target. Ithea Morvain, wife. The system noted he had engaged a lethal threat to protect the target. He sustained a serious injury and was exposed to a Tier 5 toxin. His actions saved her life and reignited her will to survive. The evaluation ended with an investment grade, Supreme, listing granted abilities. Ice Empress Legacy, incomplete, Grade 7 Ice Affinity, Heaven-treading Flash, Accelerated Regeneration, Investor's Eyes, Tether Bond, and Fortified Body Constitution. Integration began. Soren stood frozen, overwhelmed by the unknown meaning of the messages. He recalled his past pain and wondered if he had truly awakened. Before he could think more, his body seized. His hand shot out to grip the sink as his knees buckled and his spine arched. A surge of cold and heat ran through his veins like liquid fire and frozen steel, causing convulsions and clenched teeth. The pain stopped suddenly, leaving him gasping. His vision cleared and muscles relaxed as integration hit 90%. Just as he started to recover, a second wave hit. Not physical, but a violent flood of information into his brain. His head snapped back, eyes rolling as the Ice Emperor's legacy flooded his mind. Thousands of complex mana paths and details forced their way in, compressing vast mastery into one agonizing moment. He saw stars rotate, glaciers flow, and the silent death of absolute zero. His legs gave out, and he slumped against the cold tile, chest heaving. Integration reached 100%, and the pressure eased into silence. Soren sat quietly, staring at his bloody, pale but steady hands. The weakness that had defined him for 20 years was gone, replaced by a dense, cold power pulsing with his heartbeat. He slowly unwound the bandage from his forearm. The skin underneath was flawless, as if uninjured. He muttered in disbelief, laughing softly as the reality of awakening sank in. The weight on his chest for 7 years was gone. Once a punching bag for siblings and invisible to friends, this had been his only dream, buried after years of failure. Now, with cold energy in his veins, he clenched his fist and forced a neutral expression, reminding himself to stay calm. Soren moved quickly to the shower, scrubbing away the half-dried blood and grime from his transformation. The stench of his past self washed down the drain. After drying and changing, he returned to the bedroom. Ithia was still awake, eyes fixed on the door. Their gazes met, and she immediately looked at his now flawless forearm. A faint, surprised glint passed through her eyes, breaking her icy mask. Soren noticed but pretended not to, smiling reassuringly and saying the wound had already healed and it wasn't a big deal. Instead of replying, she asked if he had awakened. He nodded and gently adjusted her blanket, tucking her in despite the heavy pressure from his body. He told her she must have sensed it already, explaining why she was awake earlier. She stayed silent, her lifeless eyes following him. Used to her mood, Soren stepped away and promised that now awakened, he would protect her even better. Ithia squinted briefly, her gaze unreadable, then turned to stare at the far wall. Soren gave an awkward smile, realizing how it might sound to a former 7th Circle Ice Empress, a new novice promising to protect a fallen legend. It sounded like a confession, but he didn't take back his words. He wished her good night, walked to his futon across the doorway and sat down. He crossed his legs into a lotus pose to explore the vast frozen ocean of knowledge in his mind. Before going deeper, he focused on his new skill, Investor's Eyes. His pupils flickered with a faint golden glow. Immediately, a faint overlay appeared around Ithia's body, and glowing text showed up in Soren's view. The display read, Name, Ithia Morvain Status. Critical age, 21 rank. 7th Circle, crippled/regressed. Current mana level, 0, sealed. Core condition, 97% destroyed, severe irreparable damage mana pathways. 4% functional catastrophic severing physical condition. Paralysis, near complete below neck. Chronic pain, level 8 out of 10 constant. Nerve damage, severe permanent without treatment. Muscle atrophy, advanced stage. Core instability, deteriorating life-threatening. Malnutrition, moderate. Cold body constitution. Ice attribute residue uncontrolled. Authority status. Frost Sovereign sealed/dormant affliction detected. Curse, S grade. 8th Circle details. Insufficient authority, unable to analyze effect. O. Origin. Immeasurable, if restored, can surpass previous peak. Recommendation. Immediate investment in recovery resources required. Soren's eyes widened in shock as he took in the information. Her condition was far worse than he expected. He knew about her paralysis and weakness, but the core destruction, near total severing of mana pathways, and constant, severe pain overwhelmed him. The note on her broken will and suicidal thoughts hit him hardest. His hands clenched into fists on his knees as he recalled every moment with her. The silence, the emptiness in her eyes, her flinching from his touch without resistance, and her repeated word alone. She wasn't just rejecting him, she was rejecting life itself. The survival estimate echoed in his mind, 8 to 14 months. If he did nothing, Ithia Morvain, now Ithia Velmera, would be dead within a year. He realized her family likely knew but abandoned her. Soren's jaw tightened as he looked at her lying on the bed, breathing shallow and uneven. He noticed her fingers twitching in spasms, the tension in her shoulders, and that she hadn't closed her eyes since he returned. She endured constant pain alone, just as she had endured everything else alone. Though he didn't know how to fix her core or heal her mana pathways, he remembered his promise to protect her. Protection meant more than stopping assassins. It meant keeping her alive and preventing her from slipping into darkness. To do that, he needed money, power, and connections. The only way was to grow stronger and use every resource. Thankfully, he now had the tools and the path. All he needed was time to grow, learn, and become strong enough to save her. He resolved to shorten the timeline to 5 or 6 months. As he prepared to dismiss the overlay, his eyes froze on a blurry line he almost missed. The overlay revealed a curse, an 8th circle curse, its name obscured. Such a curse meant near-peak power, one only someone at the highest level could place. The thought hit Soren like a blow. The incident 6 months ago, the one that crippled the Ice Empress and was called a tragic accident, might have been planned. An 8th circle curse doesn't appear by chance. Someone either paid for it or an 8th circle or higher cast it personally. He wondered if her family found out and abandoned her because the enemy was too strong to fight. They probably never investigated, unwilling to risk a fight with such a powerful foe. Losing one crippled daughter cost them nothing more. Soren saw them as cowards. Without knowing the curse's source or name, he knew too much could be dangerous. If the enemy was watching, any inquiry might lead back to him or Ethia. He decided to be extremely careful. The earlier scene of the assassin's blade came to mind. Was it a coincidence or the first move by whoever cursed her to finish the job? He didn't know and couldn't know. Soren looked at Ethia again, wanting to believe the attack was random, but deep down, he realized it was just the beginning, the tip of an iceberg hiding something huge and dark beneath. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and pushed the growing dread aside. When the time came, he'd have to be ready, for her and himself. Settling deeper into the lotus position with a straight spine and steady breath, Soren turned his focus inward. Within the vast knowledge of the Ice Emperor's legacy, one part shone brightest: the Glacial Emperor scripture, the core cultivation technique of the legacy and the base of everything else. He focused, and the knowledge unfolded in his mind like a carefully unrolled scroll. Complex diagrams appeared, tracing mana pathways through the body, showing where mana should flow, which meridians to open first, and which nodes to strengthen. Soren studied every detail closely. The technique had 3 stages, starting with the foundation stage. Its single clear goal was to form a pure ice aspect core through a process called frozen refinement. Soren absorbed the brutal elegance of the method. First, one must draw raw mana from the environment into the body, guiding it through specific paths where it converts into usable energy. Then, instead of just storing it, the mana is frozen inside the core. This freezing compresses the mana to fit more in less space and shatters impurities, the chaotic fragments and foreign essences that contaminate normal cultivation, forcing them to dissolve and leave the body. Only the purest essence remains, crystallizing as the foundation of cultivation. He exhaled slowly and focused on sensing the mana around him. At first, there was only darkness and his heartbeat. Then, at the edge of his senses, a faint shimmer appeared, like cold heat waves drifting invisibly through the room and walls. Soren realized this was mana, the raw energy of the world itself. With his newly formed core acting as a spiritual organ, he could finally perceive what had always been there. He reached out his awareness to grasp one of those threads, but it slipped away repeatedly, drifting past like smoke, untouchable. The knowledge in his mind showed how it should work, the mental technique, breathing pattern, circulation path, but knowing and doing were different. Like reading how to swim and then being thrown into the ocean, he struggled. Gritting his teeth, he tried a new approach. Instead of grabbing, he pictured his core as a deep, empty well naturally pulling things in. He imagined the mana drifting down, drawn by gravity and inevitability. Time passed, and slowly one thread shifted just enough to move toward him instead of past him. Soren focused harder, keeping the image as the thread drifted closer until it touched his awareness, and then vanished. His eye twitched at losing it at the last moment, concentration broken briefly. He repeated the process again and again, refusing to quit. Finally, the mana entered his body. For a moment, he felt a cool sensation spreading through his chest, formless and wild, before fading away. Frustrated, he cursed inwardly but recognized his progress. Recalling the scripture's instructions, he focused on his crown, picturing a gate opening to let mana in. A thread drifted near, and he guided it gently. This time, instead of scattering, the mana followed the pathway in his mind. Down his head, along his spine, branching into smaller channels. As it moved, the mana changed, gaining form and density. By the time it reached his core, it was pure mana, his mana. The feeling intoxicated him like cold water after days in the desert. His core, once empty, pulsed with life. The triumph was brief. The tiny wisp of mana he absorbed was impure, so he began the next step of frozen refinement, lowering the core's temperature. The mana crystallized and hardened, the cold compressing the energy until impurities shattered like glass and dissolved. What remained was a single, flawless thread of pure mana. Soren's eyes snapped open briefly, then closed again. The process was clear now. He refocused with new confidence. The room faded, time lost meaning. The rhythm became absorb, guide, convert, freeze, refine. One thread became two, two became five, five became 10. Each cycle grew easier. His control improved, pathways widened, and his core glowed with steady, cold light. After an hour, clumsiness vanished. His intuition filled gaps where inherited knowledge left room for interpretation. He stopped following diagrams rigidly, adapting and finding his own rhythm. He pulled mana faster and refined more efficiently. His core filled layer by layer, like ice forming on a winter lake. Hours passed. The night deepened. His body stayed still, but inside, transformation happened. At dawn, Soren woke up, his eyes shining with cold light. He opened them, seeing the cold brilliance flicker before fading. He exhaled slowly, watching his breath mist in the cold air, then looked at his hands glowing faintly and humming with new energy. A smile spread across his face. He had done it. He broke through to the early stage of the first circle in just one night. Soren's smile grew at the thought. Despite limited knowledge of the awakened world, he knew most newly awakened took weeks just to sense mana and months to build a foundation. Yet he crossed the threshold in one session. The smile didn't turn to arrogance. It softened as he remembered why. It wasn't luck. It was the investment authority, the legacy, the bond, the power to regenerate, all granted by that authority. Without it, he'd still be the powerless failure lying on the floor. His eyes drifted to the bed where Ethia slept. He didn't believe it was chance that he woke this night, the night he married her and risked his life to protect her. The investment authority likely stirred because of her, with its returns coming from her, even if indirectly. Everything he had now traced back to when he chose to stay by her side. He silently thanked Ethia, owing her more than she knew. Soren stood and stretched his stiff body, noticing frost forming a perfect circle on the floor where he'd sat. The temperature had dropped sharply, likely from his cultivation and the broken window. He vowed to be more careful. Cultivating like this every night would freeze her, and he needed to fix the window soon. His gaze returned to Ethia, still asleep, breathing steady, her face peaceful despite constant pain. His heart ached at his helplessness in the situation. He stood a moment, then quietly said, "Sleep well," slipping out to wash up and prepare breakfast. The door clicked shut behind him. Ethia's eyes opened slowly. Contrary to Soren's guess, she'd been awake for over an hour, though time blurred in her pain and exhaustion. She'd felt everything, the cold seeping in as he cultivated, the shift when his foundation stabilized, his breakthrough. All night, one question lingered. Why? Why fight the assassin? Why get hurt protecting her? Why protect her at all? They were strangers forced together by families who wanted them gone. He owed her nothing. Her eyes stayed fixed on the closed door, unable to grasp what he wanted from her. Love? No, that was impossible. They'd met just yesterday and barely spoken. Love doesn't appear overnight. Was he after her body? The thought twisted her stomach. She'd heard of men marrying crippled women to control them. But she remembered how gently he carried her. How he froze when she flinched. How he adjusted his grip. And how he slept on the floor without complaint when she told him to leave. If he wanted her body, he wouldn't act that way. He asked, waited, and respected her. So what was it? Duty? The marriage contract? Family obligation? She didn't know, and that uncertainty gnawed at her more than the pain. Over 6 months, she'd learned people always want something. Her family wanted her gone, her former comrades wanted to forget her. The world wanted her to disappear. Everyone had a motive. What was his? What could a broken, dying woman offer? Nothing. No power, no status, no future. Only pain and a slow march toward death. The question circled endlessly with no answer. Her fingers twitched under the blanket, wanting to ask him, to demand the truth, but her voice wouldn't cooperate. Even if it did, she feared the answer. If he had no reason, if he was kind just to be kind, that would be worse. Kindness without reason was fragile, and she couldn't afford to believe in fragile things anymore. The door creaked open gently, breaking her thoughts. She turned toward the sound as Soren stepped in carefully, carrying a tray with food and a steaming cup of tea. He paused briefly when their eyes met. He said he was glad she was awake and had prepared breakfast for them. Soren lifted her from the bed and settled her into the wheelchair, positioning her feet and adjusting the blanket over her lap. Then he pushed her to the small table where breakfast was set. He suggested she wash up first and went into the bathroom. He returned with warm water and a soft cloth, knelt beside her, and helped wash her hands and face. Afterward, he pulled up a chair and sat close to her. The tray sat between them, steam rising from the porridge and tea. Ithea stared at the food for a moment before slowly lifting her arm. Her fingers trembled and her shoulder ached, but she forced the movement, determination flickering in her ice-blue eyes. She wanted to feed herself. Soren interrupted, saying it wasn't necessary. She froze, arm halfway raised, and looked at him. He had already picked up the bowl and spoon, scooped some porridge, blew on it to cool it, and smiled faintly at her. Before she could protest, the spoon slid warm porridge into her mouth. He murmured, "Good girl," with a soft chuckle, causing a faint blush to spread across her pale cheeks before fading beneath years of composure. Her mind protested, but she forced herself to chew and swallow. She opened her mouth to speak, but another spoonful came before she could finish. This continued, spoon after spoon, until the bowl was empty. Soren set it aside and lifted the teacup to her lips. Ithea drank the warm, soothing tea and finished it in a few sips. He set the cup down and looked at her expectantly, asking how it was and inviting criticism, mentioning he'd been cooking for himself for 7 years. Ithea stared at him, realizing he'd been alone for 7 years, just as she'd been alone for 6 months. His solitude was forced, the Velmera family's embarrassment, the ignored, unawakened son married off to a crippled stranger. She'd heard the story before, but now she didn't know what she felt. She answered quietly that it was fine. Soren's face lit up. He said he'd make something different for lunch and asked if she had any requests for vegetables, meat, or dough. She stayed silent, unsure what she wanted or liked anymore. Food stopped mattering 6 months ago when eating became a chore. Soren waited patiently, his steady eyes on hers. When silence stretched, he chuckled softly and said he'd surprise her himself. Soren stood and began collecting the dishes, stacking them neatly on the tray. Ithea watched him move, the practiced ease of his hands, the soft humming of an unfamiliar tune, and the casual way he treated feeding her as just another morning routine. The question that had circled her mind all night finally surfaced. She asked why he was doing this. Soren paused, tray in hand, and glanced back at her. When she clarified, she meant all of it, not just breakfast. He set the tray down and faced her fully, and replied softly that it was because he was her husband. Ithea blinked, surprised by his answer. She challenged him, saying that wasn't a reason. Soren smiled steadily and said he'd signed the paper and made a promise. And he didn't make promises he didn't intend to keep. He picked up the tray again, told her to rest, and said he'd be back soon before walking toward the door. Ithea stared at his back, feeling his answer explained nothing, yet found herself quietly repeating the word, husband. Noting it felt strange but not unpleasant, Soren paused halfway down the stairs, dishes in hand, at a familiar ding. Glowing text appeared before his eyes. Investment detected. Target: Ithea Valmir, wife. He froze as the system detailed the care he'd given, preparing meals, helping with hygiene, feeding her, and offering emotional support during her vulnerable, troubled state. The analysis showed improvements. Better nutrition, slightly increased trust, and a more stable mental state, while his sincere words as her husband planted hope in her subconscious. The evaluation rated the investment as low-moderate, classifying it as daily care plus emotional support. As the system calculated returns, a translucent status screen unfolded, granting him cooking mastery +1 and unlocking a rare recipe collection of 5 healing meals. Integration went smoothly, adding new knowledge that refined his cooking and introduced unknown recipes. Soren marveled at how such a simple act could trigger the investment authority. He considered that every meal, every act of care, might make him stronger. Clutching the dishes, he resolved to keep caring for her, help her recover, and be her husband. Even if the returns were coincidence, he'd persist because of his promise. Soren exhaled slowly and descended the stairs. After washing the dishes, he pulled out his phone and sat at the table to handle important matters. He called to report a break-in and attempted assault around midnight at their home, describing minor injuries and the intruder's escape. The police assured him they'd send an officer within the hour to take a statement and preserve evidence. Soren acknowledged and ended the call with a quiet exhale. He didn't expect much from the report but knew it was necessary to create a record and avoid suspicion. He'd already planned a plausible explanation if questioned later. Soren opened his phone again and searched for home care services in Greywood Quarter, specifically seeking a female caregiver experienced with mobility-impaired patients. He realized Ithea needed help with personal care he couldn't provide, for her comfort and dignity. After reviewing listings, he found Sunshine Home Care Services, which offered licensed female caregivers specializing in mobility-impaired patients with flexible schedules. He called immediately. A woman answered, introducing herself as Mira from Sunshine Home Care. Soren explained he wanted to hire a caregiver for his wife, who was paralyzed and needed daily assistance. Mira confirmed they could provide the help needed and asked about the level of care required. Soren explained his wife needed full help with bathing, dressing, and bathroom needs, essentially everything. Mira asked how many hours per day, and after a pause, Soren guessed about 4 hours for morning and evening routines. He could handle meals and general supervision during the day. Mira confirmed that was doable, stating their rate was 150 credits per hour, totaling 600 credits daily. She offered to assign a consistent caregiver to avoid multiple people caring for his wife. Soren calculated the cost, around 18,000 credits per month, and agreed, asking when someone could start. Mira offered an initial consultation as early as 1 p.m. that afternoon, which Soren accepted. She requested his address and contact info before ending the call. Afterwards, Soren leaned back, considering the plan. The assigned caregiver was Clara, a middle-aged First Circle awakened with 20 years' experience in mobility-impaired care. The consultant described her as professional, gentle, and reliable, but Soren planned to interview her personally and dismiss her if needed. With the meeting set for 1 p.m., Soren opened his banking app and checked his balance. 37,247 credits. This was his life savings from 5 years of part-time jobs without family support. He considered basic expenses, food, utilities, repairs, but then recalled recent recipes and checked ingredient prices. He found frost ginseng root at 1,200 credits for 50 grams, glacial lotus petals at 800 credits for 10 grams, spirit-infused fish at 2,500 credits each, and premium bone-warming ginger at 600 credits for 100 grams. Calculating the cost for one serving of frost-touched herb congee, including frost ginseng, glacial lotus, spirit rice, moon dew water, and minor herbs, he estimated about 4,200 credits per meal. The nerve-mending fish soup cost nearly 5,000 credits per serving, while soothing moon tea was about 1,000 credits per pot. Realizing his savings could only cover about 8 healing meals, lasting roughly a week if he fed her one per day, Soren knew he needed to adjust his plans. He decided to cook healing meals sparingly, once or twice a week, rotating carefully, and use the tea more often due to its lower cost. He also recognized the need to find a job, noting that as a first circle awakened, he could earn more despite the risks. Later, the doorbell rang. Checking the time, Soren saw it was nearly an hour since the call, right on schedule. He opened the door to find 2 officers from the Kalmyra Police Department in black tactical gear with silver badges and utility belts. The older man introduced himself as Officer Gareth, and the younger woman as Officer Lin. They came about the break-in Soren had reported. Soren invited them inside, and they immediately scanned the entryway. Officer Lin asked to see where the incident happened. Soren led them upstairs to the bedroom, explaining his paralyzed wife was inside and the intruder had stood over her bed when he woke up. Officer Gareth's expression sharpened, confirming she was likely the target. Soren opened the bedroom door to reveal Ethia sitting in her wheelchair by the window, facing away without turning around. The officers noticed the broken window, shattered glass on the floor, and the damaged frame letting in cold air. Officer Gareth asked Soren to recount the events. As Soren spoke, Officer Lin crouched beside Ethia, gently questioning her. When Soren finished, Officer Gareth asked about his awakening, showing some doubt. Soren confirmed he had awakened accelerated regeneration, likely explaining his overnight wound healing. Officer Gareth took notes and asked for proof, which Soren gave as the dagger and bloodied bandages from the nightstand. Officer Gareth examined the blade, noting it was a poisoned combat knife, meaning the break-in wasn't random. Soren urged them to catch the criminal. Officer Lin returned from questioning Ethia, shaking her head slightly, showing little useful info. The officers gathered evidence, photographed the broken window and damaged wall, and asked more about the intruder's description. Officer Gareth then gave Soren a card, advising him to report new info, promising more patrols and reviewing surveillance footage, and recommending better security measures. Before leaving, Officer Gareth reminded Soren to report to the Kalmyra Awakened Registry Bureau for official testing within 72 hours. Soren confirmed he planned to do so after handling the current situation. Officer Gareth explained the Bureau would assign a rank, register his ability, and issue a hunter license if qualified. After the officers left, Soren closed the door and exhaled slowly, feeling the visit had gone well. Despite Officer Gareth's doubts about the timing of his awakening, there was no proof to dispute his story. They would likely check his background and records, but Soren was confident since he followed procedures, reported the incident and provided evidence, and told the truth mostly. Now, all that was left was to wait. For the investigation, the caregiver's arrival at 1 p.m., for any further attacks from whoever sent the assassin, and to explain his next steps to Ethia. During lunch, Soren fed Ethia simple vegetable soup while explaining his plans. Hiring a caregiver, registering at the Awakened Bureau, and finding work to cover their expenses. Ethia accepted everything quietly, perhaps understanding his need to be away sometimes or sharing unspoken worries. Her agreement was enough. A few minutes after 1 p.m., the doorbell rang again. Soren, having just cleaned the kitchen, wiped his hands on a towel and composed himself before opening the door. A woman in her mid-40s stood on the porch, with a round, kind face and gentle eyes that crinkled when she smiled. Her graying hair was covered by a traditional headscarf, and she wore a long, modest dress in muted colors with a professional robe over it, carrying a small bag. She greeted him warmly, introducing herself as Lady Clara. Soren invited her inside and said his wife was upstairs, suggesting she meet Ithea first. Clara agreed, moving calmly and observing the entryway before following him upstairs. Soren noted her professional yet warm demeanor. In the bedroom, Ithea sat in her wheelchair by the window, turning to assess the visitor when Soren announced Clara's arrival. Clara crouched to Ithea's eye level and introduced herself softly and respectfully, without condescension. Ithea stayed silent, and Clara waited patiently. Clara spoke about her experience, care philosophy, and approach, asking gentle questions but never pressing for answers. Ithea occasionally nodded or said a word, all accepted without comment. Clara admitted it was uncomfortable having a stranger in the home but assured Ithea she could tell Soren if unhappy, and they would leave immediately. After a pause, Ithea asked why Clara chose this work. Clara explained she had been unable to walk since birth and was cared for by a retired nurse neighbor who helped with daily tasks and exercises. This care continued despite Clara's anger and resistance. Over years, Clara made small progress until she fully regained mobility after awakening, inspiring her to help others. Ithea studied her before nodding faintly. Clara smiled with relief and gratitude. Soren suggested they go downstairs to sign the contract. In the living room, he prepared tea and conducted a brief interview, asking about Clara's background, experience, and references. He mentioned the previous night's incident without details, stressing the need for trust. Clara answered honestly, satisfying him. Clara accepted the job and offered to start immediately. They agreed on a schedule with Clara working afternoons and evenings to fit Soren's business at the Awakened Bureau. After signing, Soren led Clara upstairs to explain the arrangement to Ithea, then grabbed his jacket. At the door, he paused to watch Clara unpack and talk with Ithea before leaving with a satisfied smile. Outside, Soren stayed near the house, focusing on the tether bond linking him to Ithea upstairs, sensing her location and safety. After half an hour without incident, he felt his worries were unfounded and decided to handle registration next. He walked to the Kalmyra Awakened Registry Bureau in the Merchant's Crown District, a large modern building of reinforced concrete and mana-infused glass. At the reception desk, a sharp-eyed middle-aged woman asked for his name and purpose. Soren identified himself as Soren Valmir, awakened the previous night, and said he wanted to register and apply for a hunter's license. She typed quickly and asked for his awakening date. He confirmed it was March 1st, the previous night. She confirmed he was within the 72-hour window and handed him a tablet, instructing him to fill out the initial form and then proceed to testing Wing B by following the blue line on the floor. Soren took the tablet and sat on a bench to complete the detailed form, including personal info, medical history, emergency contacts, previous job, and reasons for pursuing hunter work. He filled it out carefully, answering honestly where needed and vaguely elsewhere. After submitting the form, Soren followed the blue line down a corridor into the testing area. A young man with a clipboard introduced himself as Technician Mori, who would oversee Soren's evaluation. Mori led Soren to a transparent cylindrical chamber and asked him to step inside to measure mana capacity and affinity, and core stability while naturally circulating his mana. Inside the chamber, the door sealed with a soft hiss, and the crystal walls glowed and pulsed, gently pressing against Soren's core. He circulated his mana following the glacial emperor scripture pathways. The crystal walls brightened with swirling blue light in intricate patterns, accented by a faint pale green. After a minute, the light dimmed, and the door opened. Technician Mori studied his tablet, eyes widening, and noted Soren had dual affinity. Ice primary and wind secondary, both high grade. Mori instructed Soren to place his hand on a smooth, spherical crystal on a pedestal, which lit up and projected a holographic display showing affinity evaluation, innate abilities, circle rank, and overall assessment. The display showed Soren's primary affinity as Ice, grade 7, S rank, with high potency and excellent compatibility. Secondary affinity is Wind, grade 5, B rank, with moderate potency and good compatibility. Innate abilities of accelerated regeneration, C rank, and fortified body constitution, D rank. Current rank as First Circle, Early Stage. Core capacity of 2,547 out of 10,000. Excellent core stability and pathway integrity. Overall assessment. High potential. S-Class. Combat type awakened. Recommended path hunter/gate clearing. Peak estimated at 7th Circle. Mori expressed amazement at Soren's grade 7 Ice Affinity and Dual Affinity with 2 innate abilities, placing him in the top 5% worldwide. After confirming Soren's age as 22 and awakening at that age, Mori showed genuine surprise, explaining natural awakening at 22 was unheard of and usually required artificial stimulus or trauma. Mori asked what triggered the awakening. Soren said it was a life-threatening situation. Mori quickly took notes, predicting Soren's data would be flagged and attract attention from the Bureau, guilds, and the National Awakened Defense Corps. Soren mentioned setting his profile to restricted, which Mori called smart but insufficient to block official access, especially from the Bureau. Mori warned Soren would likely be contacted within a week. Mori then led Soren to the physical assessment area, instructing him to demonstrate strength, speed, and endurance. Soren lifted 250 kilograms overhead with ease, sprinted at 48 miles per hour, and maintained stamina through 15 minutes of continuous exertion without fatigue. Mori recorded the results, impressed. After the tests, Mori processed Soren's license. 20 minutes later, Soren held his official hunter's license, a sleek card made of reinforced material with a mana signature chip. The license showed his name, ID, age, rank, Hunter rank F, license type Standard Hunter, issued March 2nd, Year 197 PA. Mori gave Soren an info packet with access codes for the Hunter Network app and web portal, offering gate schedules, vendors, party recruitment, legal resources, and more. Mori advised against solo gates at first, recommending joining a party to gain experience and avoid rookie mistakes that often lead to death. Soren agreed. As Soren turned to leave, a woman in her 30s with sharp features and a bureau badge approached. She introduced herself as Senior Administrator Vera from the Bureau's Talent Acquisition Department and asked for a moment to discuss career opportunities with him. She mentioned Soren's outstanding evaluation results. Soren declined, saying he had personal matters to handle first. Vera accepted, stressing that family comes first, but gave him her business card and highlighted the Bureau's benefits, including training resources, access to restricted gates, steady income, and protection. Her card read, Administrator Vera Lewis, Talent Acquisition Department, Kalmyra Awakened Registry Bureau, Direct Line, 555-0198. Soren thanked her and said he would keep it in mind. Vera reminded him that S-rank potential would attract many offers despite profile limits and hoped he'd choose carefully and consider the Bureau. She nodded once more and walked away. Soren pocketed the card and left the building. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Soren looked at his license, a faint smile on his lips. He was now a registered hunter, able to earn enough money to afford healing meals and properly support Ithia's recovery. He pulled out his phone and opened the Hunter Network app, which greeted him with a welcome message and features like gate schedule and availability, party recruitment board, equipment market, resource exchange, quest listings, and training facilities. He went to the gate schedule. Several First Circle gates were open in the Kalmyra region, but only one allowed solo clears, the First Circle Gate Azure Slime Forest, marked open and permitting solo entry. Soren hesitated, staring at the listing, debating whether to try his luck. He knew slimes were among the weakest monsters, recommended for beginners due to their low threat, slow movement, and predictable attacks. It seemed like a perfect first gate, but Soren's jaw tightened as he admitted he didn't really know how to fight. He had experience with street fights and brawls against humans, but only one fight against a monster, the assassin last night, which he barely survived by luck and desperation. He knew that in a gate, there was no escape, and relying on luck meant death. He exhaled slowly and closed the gate listing, deciding to learn how to fight properly first. Soren navigated to the training facilities section of the Hunter Network app. A list appeared with dozens of gyms and dojos across Kalmyra, each specializing in different combat styles. Hand-to-hand, swordsmanship, archery, spear arts, axe work, and mixed combat. He scrolled through descriptions, thinking he needed a weapon he could learn quickly. The Ice Emperor's legacy technique, Frost Palm Strike, was powerful but required solid fundamentals. He needed something practical, usable right away. He considered a spear, noting its beginner-friendly moves. Simple thrusts, defense, and effective distance control. Filtering for beginner-level spear training, several facilities appeared. He checked their ratings, locations, and prices, stopping at one in the Steelheart district. The Iron Reach Dojo specialized in spear combat from beginner to advanced levels, taught by Marcus Varn, a third-circle hunter with 15 years experience. The price was 500 credits per 2.5-hour session. The rating was 4.7 out of 5 from 182 reviews. Checking the time, 3:32 p.m. Soren noted Clara's shift ended at 7 p.m., giving him 3.5 hours, enough for a 3-hour training session if he left immediately. He booked a session starting at 5 p.m. Soren stood up from the bench outside the bureau, pocketed his phone, and hailed a taxi. A sleek black car pulled up quickly, and the driver asked for the destination. Soren gave the address, Steelheart District, Iron Reach Dojo. The driver confirmed it would take about 15 minutes. Soren got in and watched the city pass by as the taxi drove through the Merchant's Crown District, industrial areas, and residential blocks, before finally reaching the training district. The taxi stopped in front of a sturdy building made of dark stone and reinforced steel, with a simple sign, Iron Reach Dojo, Spear Combat Specialists. Soren paid the fare and stepped out, appreciating the unassuming exterior before going inside. Inside, the dojo was spacious with high ceilings and polished wooden floors. Training dummies lined one wall, and racks held spears, staffs, and polearms. A few students trained in the back with sharp, controlled movements. A receptionist looked up and asked for his name. Soren gave it and confirmed his 5 p.m. beginner spear combat session with instructor Varn. The receptionist directed him to the prep area to wait. Soren sat on a bench, watching the students' clean footwork, precise strikes, and steady breathing, silently trying to learn from them despite not fully grasping the complexity. After a few minutes, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 30s approached. His hair was cropped short, and a jagged scar ran down the left side of his face. Wearing simple training gear and carrying a wooden practice spear, he asked if Soren Valmir was his name. Confirming, Soren met Marcus Varn, his instructor for the day. Marcus asked if it was Soren's first time using a spear and entering a gate. Soren admitted it was his first spear session and that he planned to enter a gate soon. Marcus nodded approvingly, calling it smart to learn before diving in, warning that many ignored this step and died. He gestured toward the training floor and told Soren to change into the training uniform in the locker room. Soren changed quickly and returned to the training floor, where Marcus led him to a sectioned-off room with padded mats and mirrors along one wall. Practice spears stood in a rack nearby. Marcus grabbed 2 wooden spears and tossed one to Soren, who caught it awkwardly. Marcus then crossed his arms and fired off questions about Soren's fighting experience, training, martial arts background, weapon use, reasons for choosing the spear, plans for entering gates, and motivation for registering as a hunter. Soren answered honestly each time. Marcus studied him silently, then frowned slightly upon learning Soren had awakened only the day before, concluding that explained his average skills. Marcus pointed to the center of the room and told Soren to start by showing how he would hold the spear, doing whatever felt right. Soren gripped the shaft near the middle, seeking balance. Marcus circled him, noting the instinct wasn't bad but incorrect, explaining Soren was holding it like a staff, not a spear. He stepped in and nudged Soren's rear hand down to the spears but, calling it the engine where all power starts. Then he adjusted the lead hand higher up, calling it the steering hand that guides the point and directs thrusts, asking if Soren felt the weight shift. Soren adjusted his grip, feeling the wood bite into his palms, and the spear felt more anchored. Marcus approved, then noted Soren's stance was stiff, like a statue. Marcus dropped into a stance, knees bent, torso angled, telling Soren never to face an opponent head-on. He stressed that turning the body makes you a smaller target. Soren copied the stance, shifting weight as Marcus said to keep the back foot grounded and front foot ready. He kept a 60-40 weight split. Soren nodded. The next hour flew by thrust, reset, thrust, reset. Marcus told Soren to relax his shoulders, saying he was fighting the spear, not the enemy. They added footwork, stepping into strikes and back to recover, keeping movements smooth. Marcus told Soren to keep his eyes on an imaginary chest ahead, not his hands. Soren's forearms and quads burned. Sweat stung his eye, but Marcus gave no break. They drilled defensive angles and footwork until Soren's moves became muscle memory. Then Marcus raised a hand to stop. Soren let the spear tip drop to the mat, breathing hard. Marcus wiped his hands, praised Soren's quick grasp, but warned knowing moves and performing under pressure differ. He said with time and practice, Soren's body would catch up. Marcus leaned his spear on the rack and suggested 5 or 6 more sessions. He promised Soren could hold his own and maybe survive his first fight. Soren nodded, voice rough, and thanked him. Marcus warned Soren to avoid the gates until after at least 3 more sessions to stay alive. He patted Soren's shoulder, recognizing his potential and advising patience. By the time Soren changed and left the dojo, the sky was deep purple, streetlights casting orange on wet pavement. He checked his phone. 7:38 p.m., noting Clara would finish soon. He hailed a taxi, leaning back as the city blurred by. At home, the evening was quiet and dark. He paid the driver and stepped inside, legs still aching from training. Soft light spilled from the living room where Ethia sat in her wheelchair by a small table, Clara across from her, speaking gently. Both looked up as Soren entered. He greeted them, apologized for being late, and thanked Lady Clara. Clara smiled warmly, saying no apology was needed and his timing was perfect as she was about to leave. She gathered her bag. Soren offered dinner, but Clara declined politely. He offered a taxi, but she said her husband was on his way. Clara moved toward the door, glanced back at Ethia, and said she'd see her tomorrow. Ethia nodded faintly. Clara told Soren she'd taken care of everything and he could rest until her next visit. Soren followed her outside and waited on the porch. Minutes later, headlights appeared. A modest sedan pulled up, and an older man with kind eyes waved from the driver's seat. Clara waved back, introduced the man to Soren, wished him a good evening, then got in. The car pulled away. Soren went back inside. Ethia stayed seated by the table, her gaze distant. Soren wheeled her toward the kitchen, offering to make tea. He settled her near the counter where she could watch, then filled the kettle and set it to boil. As he prepared tea, Soren talked about his day, from waking up to nearly collapsing from exhaustion in the dojo. He stopped when the kettle whistled, poured hot water over carefully measured tea leaves and rare herbs, watching the liquid turn pale silver. The aroma filled the kitchen, sweet, calming, with an ancient hint. Soren said that's why he was late and apologized if he caused worry. Ethia didn't respond but focused her attention on him. He poured the tea into a cup, brought it to her, and gently held it to her lips, tilting it for her to sip. After a pause, Ethia drank. Her eyes widened briefly as warmth spread through her chest, flowing through damaged paths like cool water over burnt ground, easing a constant ache. Her breathing steadied, and tension in her shoulders eased slightly. She realized this was no ordinary tea and snapped her gaze to Soren, who smiled calmly as if nothing unusual was happening. He didn't explain but kept helping her drink, one careful sip at a time, as if it were natural. Though she wanted answers, the herbal warmth pulled her toward sleep, a rare peace overshadowing the mystery. Soren set the empty cup aside and stood. He wheeled Ethia back to the bedroom where the broken window had been replaced earlier that day by a local handyman while Clara was there. Soren added a detection charm near the frame, a basic security measure from the Hunter Network app to alert him of any intrusion attempts. It wasn't perfect, but better than nothing. He lifted Ethia from the wheelchair, placed her on the bed, and adjusted the blankets. He told her he'd return soon. Ethia watched him with ice-blue eyes but didn't respond. Soren left the room and went to the bathroom. Hot water soothed his aching muscles as he washed quickly, scrubbing away sweat and soreness from training, then dried off and changed clothes. Back in the bedroom, he found Ethia still awake, lying in the same position. Instead of lying down, he sat cross-legged by the door, deciding to cultivate as much as possible. He closed his eyes, slowed his breathing, and felt her gaze silently on him. Ignoring it, he sank into meditation. The glacial emperor scripture guided his focus inward as he drew mana from the air, circulating it through his pathways and refining it through the frozen refinement process. Time blurred, the room grew colder, and ice mana gathered around him, frost faintly forming on the floor. Hours passed as Soren cultivated steadily, his core filling layer by layer. When he finally opened his eyes, the room was still dark. He blinked groggily and checked his phone. 2:47 a.m. He had cultivated for nearly 5 hours. His body felt energized from the mana flow, but his mind was exhausted, weighed down by mental fatigue. He decided it was time to sleep and glanced at the bed where Ethia had finally fallen asleep, her breathing slow and steady. Soren carefully lay down on his futon and closed his eyes, falling asleep within minutes. Several hours later, morning light filtered through the window as Soren's eyes opened slowly. He checked his phone. 6:38 a.m. He noted he'd slept about 4 hours and felt surprisingly refreshed, the physical and mental fatigue gone. Soren stood and left the room quietly, heading to the bathroom first to splash cold water on his face. Then he went downstairs to the kitchen, pulling eggs, bread, and vegetables from the small fridge. He cracked the eggs into the pan and watched them sizzle. Suddenly, a familiar ding froze him in place. Glowing text appeared in his vision. Investment detected. Target: Ethia Valmir, wife. Analyzing investment. Investment. The subject gave the target a rare therapeutic drink, soothing moon tea. The tea contained high-grade medicinal herbs chosen to ease chronic pain and improve sleep. Analyzing target response. Target took full dose. Pain reduced by 18%. Sleep quality greatly improved. Mental state further stabilized. Subconscious trust in the subject increased. Evaluating investment significance. Soren stared at the messages, spatula still in hand. Evaluation complete. Investment grade. Low moderate. Investment type. Medical care plus emotional support. Calculating returns. Dots pulsed in his vision. Calculation complete. Returns granted. A new window appeared. 1. Moonlight tree leaves. 2. Frost whisper petals. 3. Starlight ginseng root. Integration initiated. Progress. 10%. 100%. Integration complete. Please check your inventory. Asterisk. Soren raised his brow in confusion. Before he could finish the thought, another flood of information overwhelmed his mind. He gripped the counter, breathing deeply to steady himself. After a few seconds, the information settled, and his expression shifted through many emotions. He realized the investment authority had more functions than he'd known. Looking around the kitchen to confirm he was alone, he closed his eyes and thought clearly, status, open. Immediately, a translucent window appeared in his vision. Personal information, name, Soren Valmir, age, 22, circle rank. First circle, early stage, hunter rank. F, core status, mana capacity, 3124/10,000 core stability. Excellent pathway integrity. Excellent affinity. Ice, grade 7, S rank. Wind, grade 5, B rank. Innate abilities, accelerated regeneration, C rank. Fortified body constitution, D rank. Techniques and skills, A glacial emperor scripture. Foundation stage, first star, frost palm strike. 0% mastery. Heaven treading flash, stage 0, theory only. Quick step, 0% mastery. Cooking mastery, intermediate LV, 5, 53% mastery. Equipment, tether bond, bound to, Ithia Valmir, hunter's license, standard. Grade F, inventory, to moonlight tree leaves, 50G. Frost whisper petals, 30G. Starlight ginseng root, 20G. Credits, personal account, 34,147. Investment authority, primary target, target. Ithia Valmir, wife, bond status. Marriage contract investment history, first investment. Supreme, second investment. Low moderate, third investment. Low moderate total investments. 3 total returns received. 10 Soren stared at the display, his heart pounding at the detailed info tracking his progress and investments. He noted Ithia was already marked as his primary investment target, wondering if it was because he hadn't invested in others or if there was a special link between his awakening and his wife. He dismissed the status screen and returned to the stove, humming softly as he finished cooking. The eggs turned out perfectly. He plated them with bread and veggies and carried everything upstairs. Ithia lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Soren helped her sit up slightly and began feeding her breakfast. She ate silently as usual. Afterward, he returned to the kitchen. Another ding sounded. Investment detected. Returns granted. Recipe collection. 5 dessert recipes. Soren smiled faintly as the new knowledge settled in, now used to the process. After breakfast, he helped Ithia into her wheelchair and took her downstairs to the living room. He checked the time. 7:42 a.m. Clara was due at 8 a.m. Soren sat down and planned the day in his mind. He scheduled a dojo training session for 8:30 a.m., which he had booked the day before, followed by buying a proper weapon. He planned to sell the Starlight Ginseng root to fund the spear purchase while keeping some money left, noting it wasn't in any recipes. He intended to practice at home in the afternoon and attend an evening dojo session. At exactly 8 a.m., the doorbell rang. Soren opened the door to find Clara smiling warmly. She greeted him politely, and he told her Ithia was in the living room. Clara nodded and stepped inside. Soren grabbed his jacket and told her he'd be out for a few hours but to call if anything happened. Clara assured him Ithia would be fine. Soren glanced at Ithia once more before leaving. The day went as planned. After morning training, Soren went to the market and sold the ginseng for 2,800 credits, feeling satisfied. He then bought an F-rank steel spear for 2,000 credits and basic hunter clothes for another 1,000. After lunch, he practiced the first move of Heaven Treading Flash and trained his spearmanship. In the evening, he returned to the dojo for another session and ended the day with 6 hours of cultivation. The next day followed the same routine: morning session, afternoon practice, evening session. 2 more investments in Ithia brought 2 more returns. By the third morning, Soren stood before the mirror, spear in hand. Marcus said he was ready after 3 sessions, but Soren did 2 more, successfully learning a basic spear technique. He checked the Hunter Network app and saw the first circle gate in the Azure Slime Forest listed as open with solo entry allowed. He tapped reserve, confirming his entry time as 9 a.m. that day. Setting the phone down, Soren felt excited. Today he would challenge his first ever gate. Though one of the weakest and easiest, he wasn't embarrassed. He had researched slimes and the gate for almost 30 minutes the day before, ignoring Ithia's strange stares. After all, slimes were weak and beginner-friendly, but Soren was not like everyone else. Soren was a man who had awakened at 22 after a lifetime of mediocrity, nearly dying in a fight with an assassin and only starting to wield a spear 3 days earlier. He had studied slimes extensively, their movement, weak points, attacks, reproduction, diet, and intelligence. He even watched tutorial videos on the Hunter Network, including titles like Top 5 Mistakes Beginners Make in Slime Gates, How to Clear Azure Slime Forest Solo Complete Guide, and Slime Core Harvesting Tips, Maximize Your Profit. Ithea watched him take notes with a skeptical look, silently doubting his seriousness. Yet Soren stayed determined, knowing embarrassment is temporary but death is permanent. By the time Clara arrived, Soren was dressed in his new hunter clothes, his steel spear resting against the wall by the door. Clara noticed the gear and asked if he was going to a gate today. He confirmed, and Clara smiled warmly, wishing him luck and expressing confidence in his success. Soren thanked her, then turned to Ithea, who sat silently in her wheelchair nearby, staring at him. Just as he was about to leave, she gave a faint nod, offering her own encouragement. Soren's chest tightened slightly before he nodded back, promising he'd return soon and urging her to stay safe. Then he grabbed his spear and left. The taxi ride lasted exactly 20 minutes as Soren watched the city pass by, gripping his spear across his lap. He reminded himself not to overthink, knowing he was trained and ready. The taxi stopped at a cordoned-off area in the industrial district. Soren paid the driver and stepped out into the quiet zone, where a simple checkpoint barrier marked the perimeter and a lone bureau official sat bored at a folding table. Beyond the barrier, the gate stood alone, a vertical tear in reality about 2 meters tall and 1 meter wide. Soren approached the checkpoint, confirmed his reservation, then moved toward the gate. As he neared, pressure pressed against his skin like invisible hands holding him back. The hum grew louder, and his ears popped. He stopped right in front of the gate, both captivated and intimidated by its hypnotic, pale gray swirling energy. Taking a deep breath, Soren tightened his grip on the spear and stepped forward. The moment he touched the surface, reality twisted and the world lurched. His vision blurred, and then he was inside.